run by our fantastic friends at Sistren Legal Collective, Samara Lawrence and Kea Advani. So I'm just going to hand straight over to you guys. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Lucas. Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet all of you, especially the ones with the cameras on. It's really nice to put faces to names wherever possible. So we're super excited to do this workshop for you. We did a similar one for last year's cohort. So hopefully we've learned from that experience and iterated. And we're here to talk about trading safely and legal forms today. So we're just going to start out with introducing ourselves so you know who we are and what we're doing here. So I'll start out with introducing myself. My name is Kea. I was born and brought up in India, and I moved to the UK in 2010 as a student to study law here. And part of the reason why I decided to study law was because I was working with human rights organizations back home in India before I was a lawyer. And the people that I was working with, for the most part, were lawyers. And it felt like that's where a lot of the interesting and inspiring work happened. So I really wanted to kind of work in that space and think about human rights as kind of my job. And I came to the UK and I studied law. And I realized really quickly, actually, it's really hard to get a job here when you're on a visa, and to kind of figure out your life and do the work that you want to do. So I ended up working with a corporate commercial law firm for a while, which is what lots of lawyers who qualify here end up doing for a while. So that killed my soul for about 5 years. And then I found my way back a little bit by working with another law firm called Bates Wells, which specializes in working with nonprofit organizations, so charities, social enterprises in the UK. And a lot of my work was thinking about how do we support boards of nonprofit organizations, trustees, directors? How do we set up organizations? So that was my work for maybe about 3 years, and that's where Samara and I met and became friends. But we also found working with a big law firm that it's actually quite a limited environment that you work with, and the people that you're supporting and working with often end up being the really big organizations of this world. So the Oxfams and the Amnesty Internationals and, the big organizations that have a lot of funding and a lot of resources, and really interested in going back to working with more grassroots organizations, working with individuals whose work was really inspiring. So Samara and I started talking about different ways in which we could do that. And we started Sistren Legal Collective. So we'll tell you a little bit more about Sistren, but I'm going to let Samara introduce herself first.
Thanks, Kea. Really nice to meet everyone and to be with you all this evening for this workshop. So my name is Samara. I'm a lawyer by background as well. Been a lawyer for about 6 years now. I've got quite a similar career background to Kea in that I started off my career in more kind of corporate finance law firms, and then moved into the same law firm as Kea, she mentioned, and specialised in advising charities, social enterprises and non-profits. So that's kind of where I spent the bulk of my career now, is in that environment. So really helping organizations with their setup, their legal structuring, helping them to understand governance models, fundraising in the UK, and then just kind of general legal commercial contracts as well. And yeah, and as Kea said, like, it's really great that we've had this opportunity to set up Sistren together. So we both left working in private practice law firms to do more community work and grassroots work as well. We've also got other jobs on the side as well. So yeah, and we felt like with Sistren, this was a better way for us to connect with community groups that couldn't access the law firm, and there's so many barriers to accessing legal support in this country, like cost being one of the main ones, and then kind of structural barriers. And we've done a lot of work with understanding what community groups and organizations need from their lawyers, how best to kind of communicate our advice, accessibility, trying to make the language of legal support kind of more accessible to people so that they can get their organizations off the ground, that they can really thrive in this environment, and feel supported by their lawyers. And that we also just try and think about how we can try and break down some of those very sometimes strained lawyer-client dynamics in the UK specifically. So that's what we're trying to do here. So you can give us feedback on if you think we're achieving that. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, so we're going to go into talking about the agenda in just a moment. Before that, I just wanted to, we have sort of 3 asks of you. So this session runs for about 2 hours and a bit, and it's going to be extremely boring if we sit here and lecture you and monologue to you. So we would love for this session to be as interactive as possible. So for that, please ask questions, and you can do this in any way that feels comfortable. So you can drop your questions into the chat if you want to while we're talking. You can put your hand up. You can just unmute and interrupt us if you want to ask a question. So feel free to jump in. The other thing is that we have legal knowledge, obviously, but you have different types of knowledge that you come to with this room. And so this is not us being the experts in the room telling you what needs to happen. And, we'll share our knowledge around the law, but we'd really ask you to share your knowledge as part of this session as well, which means if we're saying something that doesn't work really for you, let us know and let other people in the room know so that other people are learning from your experiences. If you have answers to questions that we don't have the answers to, because we won't have the answers to everything, feel free to chip in and add those answers. So that's the second ask. So ask questions, answer questions. And then the third is we'll try and integrate different areas in which we'll ask you to participate, to contribute, to have a discussion. So please do participate in those parts of the session. And we'll also use Mentimeter. I don't know if you have used it before, but I'll share how to do that in just a minute. So please do that as well and participate, and we'll try and make this session as dynamic as possible. So with that, I will share screen and go to the first Menti. So hopefully everybody can see that. So these are just instructions on how to access Mentimeter. So you can do it in 2 ways. You can either pull out your phones and scan the QR code, and that should take you to the right page, or you can open up a new tab from your computer and then enter that code 89046713. And once you've done that and you start seeing a page, if you can just tap, if you can see the little heart button in the bottom right, yeah, 1 person, 2 people, great. So if we can have 5 people engaging with Menti, then I'll know enough of you have been able to log on. Amazing, 6 people. Okay. So let's just go to our first slide. This is just a practice slide to make sure everybody is able to access, able to type in. So just type in hello, hola, namaste, whatever feels comfortable. Love it. Thank you. I'm not even going to try and pronounce some of the words, but if anybody wants to unmute and say hi, please feel free to do so.
Mine is Makadi. That's the one in blue.
Makadi.
Where's it from?
Nice.
Which language?
That's Zimbabwe.
Nice, thank you.
Salam, marhaba, and namaste from me. Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into the Menti. So we said we would like this to be a community knowledge and sharing space. So we've introduced ourselves quite extensively, but we would love to know who's in the room. So we're asking you to just type 3 words to describe you, and that way it becomes a little easier for all of us to have a conversation rather than just a one-way flow of information if we know who's in the room and who you are as well. So I've put mine up there. I'm a migrant, I'm a mother, I'm a lawyer. So any 3 words that you feel like resonate with you and describe you.
Sorry, can I get code, please? Kind of.
The code, yes. It should be at the top. Yeah, it's getting cut off. Just give me a sec. There we go. 89046713. Oh, I love these responses already. So trainer, youth participation enthusiast, funny, amazing. We need some funny. Psychologist, volunteer woman, refugee, father, and Ethiopia. Zara, Iranian mother, refugee, doctor maker. I'm intrigued to know what that is. That's amazing. Does that mean, Zara, you train doctors? Summer, engineer, nature lover, tree planter. Nice to meet you, Summer. Great. Thank you for all of the responses. Chido, unique social worker, always smiling, love it. And then Samara is in here, community lawyer, tag rugby player, and sister. Thanks, everybody. That really helps with just getting a sense of who's here. And we might come back to you and ask for information, advice as we go along. Okay, back to you, Samara. So just to give you a sense of what we'll cover today, we'll go through the different types of business ideas first. And I think this will go to some of the topics you might already have covered in your turn cohort. And then we'll spend more time on the legal bit of things. So what are the different legal structures that you could use for your ideas? We'll spend 20 minutes on that. And then we'll do a deeper dive into the two most common non-profit legal structures, so charities and community interest companies. We'll have a break then, and then we'll spend 20 to 25 minutes in breakout rooms looking at those two legal structures, so charities and community interest companies, and hopefully get some of you to a point that you feel confident, if you haven't registered already, what you need to do to register your legal form, get your head around the documents, and hopefully get maybe drafts prepared depending on how we go. We'll answer any questions, and then if anybody feels like they might not be sure about whether the legal form they've already chosen for themselves is right for them, or if they have questions around that, then we'll spend some time on that at the end. So this is what we'd like you to know by the end of the session. If there's anything that we're not covering here that you think you really want to leave this session with, let us know. So what we mean by a legal structure for your idea, why it's important to get that right, the different types of structures in English law, which legal structure hopefully will help you decide you want to move ahead with for your idea, and then how to actually register that structure. How do you actually set it up?
Great. I'll just pause there to see if anyone has any questions before we get into the workshop. And just put maybe put anything in the chat if you do, but if not, I will make a start. So before we kind of dive into legal forms, I think it's really important just to take a step back, first of all, and think about what the different business models are in the UK. And these are kind of like the buckets that you might put your categories, you might put your organization into, depending on what its purpose is. And I think understanding what your business model is really important, because it helps you to define yourself to the outside world, and it helps you to understand what your purpose is as an organization. So we've got 3 different types of business models here that I'm going to go through in a bit more detail. So the first being for-profit business models, the second is not-for-profit, and the third is social enterprise. And we'll focus in this workshop on 2 and 3, so not-for-profit and social enterprise, but we'll just kind of look briefly as well at for-profit, so you understand the difference between the 3 types of business model. So I'll start off with for-profit business models, just because these are often the most familiar kind of business models to the kind of general public, I guess. The purpose of a for-profit business model is probably kind of in the name, is to make profit or money for the people who own or set up the business. And that's their kind of overriding purpose. And the profits that's generated, so the income that's generated in for-profit business models, can be used, I guess, in 2 ways. Like, one of them is to grow the company, to pay staff, to rent office space, to buy goods. And the second purpose is to pay the shareholders, which are the owners of the company, in a UK company. And the way that the shareholders or the owners are paid by the companies. You could be paid as a salaried employee, but in a for-profit business model, you can also be paid through the shares of the company, so through a legal mechanism. And the examples I've kind of scattered around the slide here are so examples that you'll probably be familiar with. Ones companies like Nike, like Shell, like X, Apple, The Guardian, Pizza Express. These are all for-profit companies which have shareholders in the company structure who can benefit from the profits that are made. So if I was a shareholder in Shell, if Shell makes a big profit at the end of the year, I might be able to benefit from some of the profits from that company through my shareholding. So I might get £200 at the end of the year because Shell has made loads of money from polluting the environment. So that's one example of a business model. So we're not really going to focus on for-profit business models because we understand in this workshop, you'll be looking more at non-profit and social enterprise models. Okay, so the next one is a not-for-profit business model. And as you will see, the primary purpose is really not to make a profit for the owners of the company. The primary purpose is to essentially benefit the public, benefit a community, and all the money that is generated by these kinds of organizations is going to be used to pay staff, to deliver activities, to deliver programs that are going to be for the public, primarily for the public benefit of the organization. And in the UK, the most common type of not-for-profit business model is a charity. And it might be called different things in different parts of the world. So you might have NGO, it might be used as another kind of interchangeable term for charity or not-for-profit. And again, I've just put some examples of kind of typical non-profit organizations in the UK. So I've got Amnesty International, which is a big human rights organization, Samaritans, which is a charity in the UK, Active Horizons, Migrants Organised, they're a charity, Migrate For, Oxfam, large NGO, and RefuAid as well. So hopefully people, some of those organizations will look familiar to you in understanding what a non-profit type of organization is. The third bucket we've got is a social enterprise. So this is a relatively new kind of organization, I guess, in a way, and it sits halfway between a for-profit organization and a non-profit organization. And quite often these are organizations which are a business, but they've got a community benefit purpose kind of ingrained in them. And whilst they might generate profits, the majority of that profit, or the main purpose of that profit, is actually to further a social mission rather than to benefit the owners or the shareholders in that organization. So you often see that they are generating income, but that isn't the primary purpose of that organization, is actually a community purpose. So we've got here an example of running language programs, anti-poverty campaigns, being the community purpose of a social enterprise. And if a social enterprise is making a profit, those profits are actually limited or capped legally by the under law. So it's not possible for the owners of the business to take out all of the profit from the company. There's actually a limit on that. So we'll go into a bit more detail about what that actually looks like if you are a social enterprise. And then I'll just hand over to Kaya now to talk in a bit more detail about legal structures and legal forms.
Yep. So we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into the relationship between the type of business model you might be thinking about and the legal structure or legal form. But a couple of things first. So first is, it'd just be good to get a sense of in the room where you are with your process in terms of setting up an organization. Some people might have set up a company or organization already to sort of house their idea. Other people might be at this workshop wondering, which direction they should go in. So it's just helpful for us to understand where you are. So I'm going to share screen again for the mentee with a quick question. Where are you in your entrepreneurial journey? The mentee code is 89046713. And the options are, you've already set something up for your idea, that you want to set up a company, but you already know what you want to set up. You want to set up a company, but you don't know what type of company is best for your idea. You're not sure if you want to set something up at all, and you don't want to set something up. So hopefully this will help us see where you are in the room. So I'll just give it a minute before going back to the presentation.
Okay, someone says they don't have the slide.
Is it not showing up?
No, it's working for me. There we go.
Yeah. Great. I'll just give it another few seconds, and if not, if it's not working for lots of people, we'll just move on. Okay, so far nobody's saying they've already set something up. So one response for you know what you want to set up, and the other for you're not sure yet. So that's fine. Let's keep going with the presentation, and hopefully there will be clarity by the end of the presentation around where you have questions. So I can see some more responses coming through now, so I'll just share the Menti at the end if there are other responses. I'll try to refresh it. So yeah, I can see 4 or 5 responses in now. I will reshare the screen once I have more responses in. So the first thing to say about legal structures or legal forms is that they are linked to your business idea. So if you know that you fundamentally want to set up a for-profit business and you want to make money out of the idea that you have, the legal form or the structure that you choose for that business should be a for-profit legal form or a for-profit legal structure. So it should be, for example, it should be something that has shares in it that allows you to get paid and extract money out of the business and earn a profit. If you know that what you're setting up is something for a community purpose, that you might want to earn a salary out of it, you might want to be able to live and make an earning out of it, but your primary motivation for setting this structure up is for the benefit of the community and what you want to do, then you're probably looking at a not-for-profit legal structure. And then there's, as Samara was saying, the in-between of a social enterprise, where, yes, elements of your idea are to do with trading or providing services or getting income from something that you're selling, but you're also doing this with a kind of community benefit idea around that, around your idea. And so maybe what you're thinking about then is a social enterprise type of legal form. So when we talk about a legal structure or a legal form, we're not talking about the type of form that you fill out, like a registration form. What I mean by the word form is structure. So I might use those two terms interchangeably when I'm talking about what is a legal form or what is a legal structure. So the process of taking your idea and putting it into a structure or a vehicle that is recognized by law in the UK is a process called incorporation. So you take your business idea, I want to support refugees and young people seeking asylum, into employment through artisan baked bread. What do I need to be able to do that? Well, I probably need an oven. I probably need flour to be able to bake the bread. I need maybe a contract with somebody who will supply the flour to me. I might need employees who will support in the baking of bread. I might need trainers. I might need a bit of insurance to make sure everybody is safe in the situation or in case equipment breaks. And I don't want to do this alone. The whole point of my idea is to support refugees and young people seeking asylum through the provision of this trade. So that community benefit is at the heart of what I'm trying to do. And so when I incorporate that idea and I put it into a business form, I call it Breadwinners. That's what I'm going to call my company. And I've decided I'm going to make it a charitable company. So the legal form that I've incorporated is a charitable company. And we'll talk about that legal form a little bit more. So what happens when you actually create a legal entity or incorporate, as the term is? What happens is you create a legally recognized vehicle or a structure that the English law recognizes, and it has a particular legal form. It has a particular structure to it. That body or that company has what is called legal personality. And what that means is that the company has its own personality in law, which is distinct and separate from your personality. So even if it's your idea, you've kind of put it into this other body, this company that now holds that idea as the vehicle for your idea. One of the major advantages of doing that is that you're protected against what is called personal liability. So personal liability is if something goes wrong with your idea. So if you're offering, bread, for example, and you're baking bread and you've used flour or ingredients that were old and people got sick, for example, you are not personally liable for that. It is the company, because the company has a separate legal personality that carries that liability. It also means if your company or organization gets into financial trouble, for example, if it goes bankrupt, your personal assets, so your house, your bank accounts aren't at risk. You're protected from personal liability. It is the company's bank accounts that can get called in. So it creates that separation between you and your idea. The other advantage of this is that the business that you create can now enter into contracts and leases. So you're not the person signing, the office space that you want to rent or the ovens that you want to rent yourself. It is the company that is signing for all of those things. That gives you a degree of protection. And the downside, obviously, is that you've created the separate legal person now. So there are obligations that you have that come with it. So there are administrative obligations. You have to manage that entity in accordance with the rules and the laws that are connected with that legal form. And you probably have to pay some types of taxes depending on which legal entity you are. So, for example, certain types of entities will need to pay corporation tax. So you need to make sure you make those tax filings on time, etc. And that still becomes your responsibility in a sense as being the person who set up that organization. So I think one of the key questions is, do you actually need to incorporate? And when, if so, when, and why would you need to? And I'm just going to reshare the Menti now because a number of people have responded, just to give you a sense of where people are. And so I think a couple of people have said they've already set up a company for their idea. If you're comfortable sharing at what stage you set up the company or what prompted you to set up the company, feel free to unmute and share or to just type into the chat. But I think it's helpful for others in the room to know, at what stage in your journey you decided to set up the company. And there are others who are still figuring it out. So we'll talk through that. So just going back to that question, do you actually need to incorporate? Generally, incorporating or setting up the company isn't the first thing that you need to do. It's actually really important to develop your idea, to think about things like, how do you want to fund it? What do you want its impact to be? What role do you actually want to play in developing the idea? Are you going to be kind of the strategic person looking over everything to do with the organization? Do you want to be an employee of the organization? Do you want to pay yourself, or do you want to do this voluntarily? Do you want others involved in developing the idea, or do you want to do this on your own? So these are all really important questions that I think the Ideas for Action program is helping you think through in lots of different ways. And to us, it's quite important to incorporate after you've thought through some of these issues, so that you're actually choosing the correct legal structure for your organization and not rushing into it too early. I think the other question is also, why do you want to incorporate? So what is prompting you to incorporate? Do you want to employ people, and that's why you need a entity or a structure that can have employment contracts? It also means that, as I said, you're going to have obligations once you incorporate. So you'll have filing obligations and other things that you need to think about. Do you want to retain the freedom and flexibility to grow and test your idea informally before you actually set up an organization and take on those obligations? Or do you want to go ahead and incorporate? And just as a personal example for me and Samara, so Sistren Legal Collective is not incorporated. We are hosted by another organization. We'll talk about that more in a little while. But we decided that actually we're in startup mode. We don't want the responsibilities of all of the kind of filing and setting up the company and, you know, dealing with everything that comes together with that right at the beginning. We actually want to test our idea a little bit for a little while before we kind of start up officially as an organization. So just think about that when and why question before you rush into registering and incorporating. So, so why is all of this important as a question, and why is your choice, the choice that you make of the type of legal form that you incorporate, important? So the first thing is different legal forms impact the types of funding you can receive. Thinking about whether you want, for example, grant funding, philanthropic funding, versus are you trying to trade and make an income? What is your model for earning and getting money into the organization? That is impacted by the type of organization you have. So some types of legal forms can be grant funded more easily than other types of legal forms. So that's one key question to think about. The other is taxation. So some types of legal forms have tax breaks in the UK where, for example, you don't have to pay corporation tax. I think corporation tax rates are currently 25% in the UK. So it's 25% of the income that you earn. If you're a different type of legal form, you don't have to pay that tax. So how important is that for you? The third is the perception of your organization. As Samara was saying earlier, for some legal forms, it's really, you know, if you say you're a charity, that's really easily recognizable. People know that you're a not-for-profit. So how important is that ease of communication and perception for your organization? And linked to that is fundamentally, are you a for-profit organization business model, or are you not-for-profit? If you're fundamentally for-profit, it doesn't make sense for you to set up a legal structure that doesn't allow you to make a profit. And it's the same on conversely. If you know that you have a community benefit, you might not need to set up a structure that allows you to have shares, for example, and make a profit. So we'll go through the different types of legal forms in the UK. There are quite a few on that screen that will give you the general kind of legal structure that exists in the UK. So these are all of the different types of organizations that can be registered in the UK. Yes, Lucas, thanks for clarifying that. Totally fine to be a for-profit company with a social mission, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. So what we'll focus on for the rest of this session is kind of the right-hand side of the screen, so more the not-for-profit side of things. So we'll talk about a little about unincorporated associations. So that's just before you incorporate. And then we'll talk about some of the key and most common legal forms in the UK. Okay, so getting into not-for-profit legal forms. The first thing I'll just mention briefly is an unincorporated association. So this is essentially a non-profit organization that is not incorporated. So you haven't gone through a formal process of registration, but you might be a group or a collective of people, for example, a voluntary group that have kind of a common mission or a common theme that you're working towards. You're not a formal legal entity, and you don't need to be registered. You don't need to go through any formality. You just exist by virtue of kind of being a group of people working towards a common mission. Some unincorporated associations might have some kind of contract or constitution or agreement between the various members that says, you know, so-and-so is the leader of the organization, and this is kind of a board. This is how we'll make decisions within the organization. But broadly, you're kind of a looser group of people who've come together. The major downside of this is that the individual members of that organization are personally responsible for everything. So they have personal liability. They don't have that separation between themselves and the organization or idea. But it does allow for a degree of flexibility. It allows for maybe more collaborative, democratic ways of making decisions. So just to say, unincorporated associations are sometimes easy enough as a starting point for you. I think we can just go on to the next slide. So we'll talk about companies limited by shares really briefly, and we'll spend a bit more time on companies limited by guarantee. So companies limited by shares are the most common for-profit legal form in the UK. And so generally you will have, so for example, I love books, I love reading, I always wanted to own a bookshop. I might start up a bookshop and I want that to do that. I'm doing something I love, but I'm also doing it as a way to make my living, to a way to make money. So I might have shares in the bookshop as the owner of the bookshop. So I am the shareholder. I have shares in the bookshop. And when the bookshop sells books and makes an income, whatever the profits are left over at the end of the year after I've deducted the cost of renting out my space and my shelving and buying the books, etc., that is the profit that I can pay myself as a dividend at the end of the year. There are lots of different types of companies limited by shares. So there might be companies that are purely led by profit, and that's all they want to do. As Lucas was talking about, you can also have companies limited by shares that have a legal clause in their documents that essentially says, yes, we're a company limited by shares, but we have a social mission. And so our mission as an organization is to, I don't know, sell books in communities that would normally not have access to books and literacy. And that's what we're trying to do through the organization. So completely fine to have that. It doesn't mean that you're the Shells and the X's of the world. You do have lots of small organizations that are companies limited by shares that might be making and selling candles, for example, or crafts that they're selling locally, and those can be companies limited by shares. One of the major disadvantages of companies limited by shares is that it is often a lot harder to get grant funding for those companies. So if you want to raise money through grants and sort of donations, it's more difficult generally for that legal form, because there is this mechanism where you can take profit out of the company because the company has shares. And that often makes it more difficult for organizations to give money as a grant or a donation, because they're not sure that that money will 100% be used for the purpose. There is a mechanism by which the owner can actually extract profit from the company. So that's the downside of companies limited by shares. Conversely, you have a company limited by guarantee, which is a similar structure to a company limited by shares. The difference is that I own a bookshop, again in this case, but I am called a member. I'm not called a shareholder. And the reason for this is there is no shares. There's no mechanism in this company for me to have shares in the company. So I stand behind the organization as what's called a guarantor. So I give a guarantee for the reading room, and I can't extract profit from this company that I set up. So I might be, I might have an organization that sells books, but all of the books that are being sold might be sold at a heavy discount so that I'm encouraging reading in communities that wouldn't have access to books. So that is a non-profit mission. And that's all I'm doing with the organization. And I'm not trying to make money out of it. I can still pay myself a salary, but I can't extract the profit out of the company because there is no shares, there's no dividend, there's no way to do that. So companies limited by guarantee are the most common non-profit legal form in the UK, and it is much easier as a result of this for them to be able to get grant funding. Maria.
Yes, I have some questions. If limited by guarantee, which responsibilities in the director of a company will have? For example, if a company have some problems and maybe some loans or something, do it what a director have responsibilities of this?
Yeah, so generally directors are responsible for the financial health of the company. I think everyday stuff is usually managed by, let's say, the CEO of a company or somebody who's the director of the company. So sorry, an executive director. So for example, a staff member, a senior staff member who's employed to look after the company, to do its finances, etc. The directors, their responsibility is overall strategy, to make sure that when the company has particular obligations to file things, so for example, you have to file annual accounts, then the directors have to look at those accounts and say, yes, they look right, or no, there's something that looks wrong with them. And so they're responsible for that oversight for the organization. They're responsible for making sure the organization is generally, for example, paying its taxes, so paying corporation tax on time, so that the administration and management in an everyday sense of the organization tends to be staff, but the strategy and the overview and the overall responsibility for the organization's compliance and its health, that tends to be the role of directors. Does that help?
I was just going to add
Sorry.
that
Thank you.
If, for example, like you mentioned, if a loan isn't paid or there are like debts to be paid by the organization, then the directors aren't responsible for paying those debts themselves. So the whole,
Yes, it's my question.
Yeah, the legal structure is that, and having a legal entity is that it separates the directors from the legal entity itself. So the directors aren't legally responsible for the debts of the organization. There are some very limited circumstances in which they would be responsible. If, for example, the directors know that the company is insolvent, i.e. it's not able to trade at a profit anymore, and they continue to trade knowingly, I guess, knowing that there's going to be further debts caused by the organization. So it's like a very limited and intentional, I guess, like destruction of the organization would cause the directors to be liable themselves. But otherwise, that's the kind of the main reason why people incorporate, is to give themselves that protection from the company's debts. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, well, you finished on this slide.
Yes, there's another question. Is there any legal limit to salaries in a company limited by guarantee? No, there's no legal limit.
Obviously, you probably won't be able to pay yourself more than the organization is actually making. So that might be the practical limit. Great. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, that was right. If you go one back.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So...
yeah, so just to finish up on companies limited by guarantee, as I said, most common legal structure for non-profits in the UK. All of the profits that the company makes are used towards the company's purposes. So that means you can use it to employ more staff, you can hire more equipment, so long as it is towards your purposes, but you can't use it to pay yourself more money to take profits out of the company as you could with a company limited by shares. You have members instead of shareholders. So that's just a difference in terminology and how you think about ownership in the company. You're definitely more likely to be able to access grant funding. There's a little bit of a scale, as you'll see in the next slide, between a company limited by guarantee and a company limited by guarantee that is also a charity. So you can be a charity as a CLG, but you're not automatically a charity when you become a CLG. So we'll talk about that distinction in just a minute.
Great. So feel free to keep putting questions in the chat and we'll keep answering them. But we're going to move on to community interest companies now, which hopefully some of you might be familiar with the term community interest company, but I'm going to explain a bit more about what they are and the circumstances in which you might want to incorporate a community interest company. And I think just to say that the conversation that Kay has just had around companies limited by guarantee and companies limited by shares are also relevant for a community interest company. So just to bear that in mind as we go through the next few slides, and then I'll go on to charities after I've done community interest companies, so you have an oversight of both legal structures. So yeah, community interest companies. So what is a community interest company? It's a legal form that was, I guess, created specifically with social entrepreneurs in mind. It was actually created by the law firm that Kaya and I used to work for called Bates Wells. And the individual that thought of this kind of legal structure really wanted to create something which wasn't a charity, but also gave social entrepreneurs a legal mechanism which would support their community mission. And had some of the, I guess, benefits of a charity, but less of the burden and less of the regulation. So a community interest company, the primary purpose of it is to provide benefits to the community rather than the people who own the community interest company. And that's kind of what we were talking about when we talked about companies by limited by guarantee before, and that social enterprise model. And there's certain aspects of a community interest company that you need to comply with in order to be able to incorporate as one. So you need to fulfill certain criteria if you want to be able to incorporate a community interest company. The main criteria for setting up a community interest company is that you need to be demonstrating that your primary purpose, so this box here, is to benefit the community and not the company's owner. And the way that you demonstrate that is, and if people are going into the breakout room later, you'll see that the question in the test you need to pass is really, would a reasonable person consider that the activities of the organization are carried out for the benefit of the community? And it's not a very difficult test to pass. Lots of people who want to do community work will be able to demonstrate that the work that they are doing is for the benefit of the community. And you need to kind of be able to explain how the work that you're doing will benefit the community. And the community can be defined. So you could have a subset of the community. It doesn't have to be the whole community. So you could say, if you live in East London, your community could be the residents of Hackney, for example, could be your community, or your community could be people with a specific characteristic. So it could be disabled people, could be your community. So you could be quite creative. It just needs to be a sufficient section of the community that you're benefiting. So it couldn't really be employees of a company, for example, wouldn't be able to meet the test for a community interest company. And a community interest company, it can either be a company limited by shares or a company limited by guarantee. So you can have two types of community interest company. And if you want to be a company limited by shares, that's totally fine. But what the community interest company does is it sets a limit on the amount of profit that the shareholders can take out of the organization. So it's, instead of it being as much as you want, it's capped at 35%. So that's kind of a way of the entity itself retaining money or assets for the community benefit. So not all of the money can be extracted for the shareholders. And then you can have a company limited by guarantee, which doesn't have any mechanism for taking out profits, and it's a completely non-for-profit entity. And I've put here that if you're a company limited by guarantee and a community interest company, you're probably most likely able to access grant funding. So it's, I guess, important to understand if you're setting up a community interest company, whether or not you want to be a company limited by shares or a company limited by guarantee, and thinking about your funding streams and how you access funding might determine whether you go for the limited by shares option or the limited by guarantee option. The other kind of key aspect of a community interest company is called the asset lock. And that's a legal mechanism in the governing document. So it's kind of like a legal clause. And what the asset lock does is it basically restricts all the money or the assets or the profit that the organization makes. And it basically says all of that has to be used for the community purpose for which it was set up. And so if you set out your community purpose at the outset, what you can't then do is use the money or the assets for something different. Even if it's another community purpose, you have to use it for the community purpose for which you were set up. So an example might be that if you've decided to set up an organization which was giving childcare in the community, you couldn't then use, for example, say you went to lease a building, for example, to do this childcare, and you put in equipment and stuff for the childcare, you couldn't then use that building for something completely different. So you couldn't be like, I actually now want to run a gym for the community, when you've actually said my community purpose was to provide childcare. So just bearing that in mind, like once you've kind of decided on your community purpose, you need to kind of stick with it under the legal framework. Maria.
Excuse me. If I say, for example, my community interest in company for refugees, it means I can only in this for refugees, or for example, if I can make some activities for children, refugees, children, yes, or it's only just refugees, or for example, like art classes for everybody and for refugees. It can be like this, or it's not.
Yeah, you can do it. You just have to be quite careful in the way you describe your community purpose. So if you just said, my community purpose is to support refugees in the community, you then couldn't use the money on supporting just the general public. But if you said my community purpose is to support the residents of X community, including refugees or primarily refugees, then you've kind of broadened out what your community purpose is. So when if you go into the community interest breakout rooms, we can kind of help you to like understand how the description of how you describe your community purpose is really important. And if you make it too narrow, then you've almost limited yourself. So keeping it as broad as possible is like the best thing to do if you want to support lots of different people.
Thank you. Where I put the descriptions about the community interest in company, which documents are main document for this?
We'll go through it. It's called like the KIC 36 form. But if you go into the we'll show you the forms, and we'll show you where you put the description of the community purpose and where in the governing document as well. Yeah,
just because when I set up a community interest company and I have a 36, but it's when I go to Gov.uk, they don't ask this form. I don't know what I do wrong, maybe something.
Oh, I'm not too sure. We'll have a look, but you definitely need the KIC 36 form to set up.
Okay, thank you.
You can do it online as well. And so maybe if you're doing the online version, it might not kind of look the same.
Yeah, I do online version. That's why I don't know why.
It won't be it won't be called KIC 36 online, but it's the same questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Oh, sorry, let me just go forward. And just to say as well, so with the community interest company, you can set up with one director. So, you know, if you're just an individual, you don't need to have, which is different to a charity where you need more than one trustee or director. But here with the community interest company, you can just have one to set up with. But just, I guess, flag that sometimes if you're looking for grant funding, grant funders might ask for 3 directors to be on the board. But to set up with, you only need to have one, and you can have more if you have them. And also, like, a kind of key factor is that directors of a community interest company can be paid, which is not the case in a charity. And when I say paid, I mean paid for their role as a director, which is different to someone being paid a salary as an employee. So that's often quite an attractive part of being a community interest company, is that you can pay your directors. And then just a few more aspects of the community interest company. So as I mentioned, community includes a section of the community, but be careful kind of how you define that section of the community. If you make it too narrow, you might find yourself in some issues. There are no tax exemptions for a community interest company. So just like any standard, the company limited by guarantee, the company limited by shares, you will have to pay tax on your profits. So any surplus profits at the end of the tax year, you'll pay corporation tax, which, as Kaya said, it was about 25%. And that's different to a charity. So I'll now explain the difference. A community interest company has quite a clear restrictions around its political purpose. So you can't set up a community interest company which has at its core a political purpose. So you can't be like a political party, for example. It's also quite challenging to be at your core a campaigning organization if you're a community interest company. So just to bear that in mind, if you have kind of questions around what it means to have a political purpose, just let us know and we can explain. And it's relatively straightforward to set up a community interest company, which is easy for a lawyer to say, I understand, but compared to a charity, it's a much quicker process in terms of the time it takes. So once you actually submit the forms for community interest company, you're usually set up within 2 days. If the regulator is happy with the form, it doesn't take very long, whereas a charity can take like months and months to set up, and it's a relatively short form as well. And then my last point on this was that the community interest company can't be a charity, so they're completely distinct kinds of legal entity. So just to bear that in mind. Okay, so just going to pause and do a little case study just to see if you've understood. Oh yeah, I'll just stop and let Yasir.
Hi, good evening. I just have 2 questions. The first question is about the profit of the community interest company. You said the directors can be paid, okay, from the profit of the company. So is it the normal salary, okay, that's paid for anyone, or is there a maximum amount of money that the directors can take from the company? This is the first question. The second question regarding the registration. If I am registered with the House of Companies, okay, and then I decided to register in Oscar, what's the legal structure? What's the legal structure of my company now? Is it a charity or a company?
I think so sorry, just on your second question, you're saying if you register with Companies House, is that what you're saying first?
Yeah.
And then did you say Oscar as the second one?
Yeah. For example, I registered now as a community interest company, okay, and after a while, 1 year, for example, I decided to make it as a charity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that happened with many community interest company, because they are looking for funding. Okay.
Yeah.
So for charity is better for funding.
Yeah.
So what would be the legal structure of my organization?
Yeah, sure.
Would be a company or a charity?
Sure. So I'll just answer the first question. I think the bit around paying directors is quite hard to conceptualize sometimes, because in an organization, what you'll have is directors, which are like the board, and they may or may not be paid in a community interest company. So these are the people that come together and they kind of have the strategic direction, like Kaya said, and you might want to pay them for their time, but in lots of cases, the directors actually aren't paid. And they do it in a voluntary capacity, and they do it to support the organization and to provide advice and kind of hold the organization. And often it's as a founder, you'll probably be the director as well if you're a community interest company. And then that's different to being an employee of the organization. And an employee would obviously be paid a salary as well. You might have volunteers, for example. And whether or not you decide to pay the directors is kind of up to you. Lots of organizations actually say, I want to pay the directors because they're giving their time to support the organization. So they should be paid some money. There's no maximum amount. I think it needs to be like a reasonable amount in the context of how much the organization's making. It's very difficult to say what it would be, and it very much depends on like how big the organization, how much money it's making.
Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, that I established a cafe, okay, as a community interest company, okay, and that cafe started to make profit, okay, and I am the founder and the director of that business. Okay, then I get profit, okay, and I am helping the community, okay, and at the same time I make money, okay. So how much money can the director in this case make or take from the profit?
There's no like limit on it. You could take all, I mean, you could pay yourself a salary, which is the equivalent of your profit if you wanted to. There's no legal limits. What there is a legal limit. If you're a company limited by shares and you're trying to take profit out as a shareholder, it's capped at 35%. But you could pay yourself as you could be an employee of the company. So you could set up the company, you could be a director, and you could also be an employee, and you could pay yourself a salary for the company. So say you want to pay yourself £30,000 as your salary as the employee. But if you're a director, you could also pay yourself a director's fee, for example. Say me and you are like, let's be directors of the company. And you'll say, Samara, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to pay you a director's fee. Here's £500 for being a director this year. Because you've given your time. I'm paying you for your time as a director to provide strategic support in the organization. But you could pay me £10,000 if you wanted to as a director. It's kind of up to you.
Okay.
Sorry, it is difficult to conceptualize, but there's no legal limit on how much you pay a director in a CIC for being a director. In the same way, there's no legal limit on paying an employee of the organization.
Yeah. What about the charity and community interest?
Oh, yeah, sorry, the second question, sorry. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. Lots of organizations, sometimes they set up a CIC and they realize, actually, I want to be a charity, so they can convert their legal structure. And we've got a slide on it later. So if you want to move from being a CIC to a charity, you can do a legal process, which means you change that legal form. So at the end of it, you'll be a charity and not a CIC anymore, and you'll be registered with the Charities Commission, and you'd essentially fall away from the register of Companies House, and you wouldn't be
many companies, many CIC after changing into a charity, okay, they still you can find them active on the House of Companies. So they are
they
still
might be a
registered.
little, it depends if they've set up a new organization and they've not closed the other one, you might see them active, but there is a legal process whereby you can just move your legal structure into a charity, and then you would you shouldn't be on the Companies House register anymore. So you would just leave one register and you'd move on to another.
Fine. Thank you.
Depending on how you've done it, yeah. Oh, sorry, I hope that helps. We will cover it in a bit.
Thank you.
Maria.
Yeah, I have a questions about the salaries. Can I pay for myself as a director salary from profit of organization? What do I have?
Yeah, you could pay yourself as a director from the profit. I guess what I'm saying is, if you are how much you pay yourself is going to depend on, you know, how much you're earning. And I think what I would also say is, it might be better to pay yourself as an employee rather than a director. It's not always, you might find, like, for tax reasons, it might be better to be an employee, a paid employee, rather than paid as a director, or maybe the other way around. I'm not too sure.
In 2 days. Sorry, how I can employ myself if I can be end director and employed together in one phase?
Sorry, say that again. So if you want to be,
so I can be yes. So how it's possible? I need to employ myself as a director, and so I can be end director and founder and employ myself.
Yeah, you could be all three things.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you can. It's kind of great, I guess. So yeah, you could be the founder. So like, say Kaya and I, we set up a legal entity. We're the founders because we started Sistering Legal Collective. We'd also be the directors of the company. So we have that legal responsibility for the organization, and we could also be employees of our own company and pay ourselves a salary for that company.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yasser. I don't know if that's the same hand or a different hand.
Excuse me, I have another question. What's the difference between social enterprise and CIC? Okay, because some people cannot differentiate between them. some people consider them as one. Okay, for example, when you apply to funding or something like that.
Yeah.
And some they are saying that are you a social enterprise? Okay, so they make it a difference between the CIC and social enterprise.
Yeah. So let me just go back a few slides. So if you remember at the beginning of the talk, we talked about business models. And so they're not legal forms, but it's like how people understand what your organization does. And it's like a description of the work. So here, social enterprise is a business with a community purpose. And that's kind of the descriptive model for the work that you're doing. And a social enterprise is often incorporated as a community interest company. So the legal form for a social enterprise is a community interest company most of the time, because the legal form best fits this description of a social enterprise where your primary purpose is a business with a community benefit purpose. So social enterprise is the business model. And then you go, if you're thinking, okay, what is the actual legal form legal entity that I want to incorporate? You would most likely go for a community interest company. So
what other type of social enterprises other than CIC?
So
yes, you can be other legal forms. So you can have a community benefit society is another legal form in the UK. Charities can be social enterprises. Companies limited by shares can be social enterprises. So essentially, social enterprises are businesses that trade for social or environmental purposes. That's kind of the business model for a social enterprise, but the underpinning legal entity that you choose can be lots of different things. It's just in the UK, we have this specific form called a community interest company, which other jurisdictions don't have. So a lot of social enterprises in the UK end up being community interest companies.
Yeah, so for example, SQ as a charity, for example, can be a social enterprise, right?
Yeah.
It's a charity, but social enterprise.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
It's all right, no problem. Thanks for the questions. I'm actually going to maybe skip this case study just because we've spent a lot of time on community interest companies. So I'm going to, this is just an example of one, which Coffee with Kids, which is an organization I think actually came through the TURN program. And they set up as a community interest company. So they're essentially a coffee shop which provides childcare to refugees and their children. I think that's right, Kaya, isn't it? And that was just as this slide here just describes some of the aspects of this organization and this choice of legal entity. So they might have set up themselves with a sole director. So the founder has to set up as themselves as the sole director. They can pay themselves, as we talked about, as an employee, or they could be paid as a director. The assets, so all of the money that this organization generates through the sale of coffees, all has to be used for the community purpose. So for providing support to refugee families and the children. Because they set up as a CLG, CIC, and they can access grant funding. They can't extract profit out of the company because they're a CLG, so there's no shareholding to take the profit out in that way. But I said you can pay yourself a salary or pay yourself as a director. And then there's no tax exemption, so they would pay corporation tax on any surplus profit that they make in the organization. Maria, I don't know if you've still got your hand up or if it's an old hand.
No, I don't raise hands. I don't know,
Okay.
maybe it's by mistake, but it's always like rising, but I don't know why I cannot. I'm sorry.
It's all right, don't worry. Okay, so we're going to move on to charities now, just so you have an understanding of the difference between the two organizations. So a charity in the UK, so there are a limited, I guess, range of types of organization that can be a charity in the UK. And what the law kind of does is says there are certain purposes that you're set up for which are charitable in the UK. And there are 13 of these, and I'll just kind of read a few of them out so you have an understanding of the types of organizations that can be charities, the types of things they need to be doing in order to be registered as a charity. So the first one is the prevention. If you're doing work which is for the prevention or the relief of poverty, that's a charitable purpose. So one example is Oxfam is a charity that operates for the prevention of poverty around the world. The advancement of education is a charitable purpose as well. So you find lots of educational establishments are also charities. That includes private schools in the UK. So schools that you pay to attend can also be a charity. You might also find things like the library. The British Library is also a charity, places that offer education to organize to people in the public. The advancement of religion is also a charitable purpose. So you'll find faith-based organizations, including churches, are charities as well. The advancement of health or saving of lives. So you think about like the Red Cross, for example, they're a charity which tries to save lives. They're a charity. The advancement of arts and culture and heritage, that's also a charitable purpose. So there are lots of organizations that are, museums and art galleries. They're also charities in the UK. The advancement of human rights is a charitable purpose, and the advancement of animal welfare. So there's loads of animal charities in the UK. So you can see there's kind of a really broad spectrum of what is considered to be charitable in the UK, but you need to fall within specific charitable purposes. The other thing that you need to do is be for the public benefit. So this is a bit like the community interest test I talked about earlier, but you need to be able to demonstrate that a sufficient section of the public would benefit from your work. So there's no point having an education organization which only benefits 5 people, because that wouldn't be charitable, because it's not enough of the public that can benefit from the organization's work. There are some key implications of being a charity. It's quite different to being a community interest company, and there's quite different aspects to it. So the first thing I've got here is that if you want to set up a charity, what you would usually need is 3 trustees. And the trustees are equivalent to directors in a like a CIC or a CLG, but they've got additional responsibilities. And the key factor is that they usually cannot be paid. So there are volunteers that will be trustees of the organization when it's set up. And like I said, they're responsible for that kind of strategic direction of the organization, their overall oversight. And I think that's one of the key things that sometimes people struggle with the charity, is that finding people that want to be trustees of the organization, that can give up their time, that are committed to the organization's purpose, but that also don't need to be paid for that work. The other key aspect of a charity is that there are tax breaks, so you don't pay any tax as a charity, and you can also benefit from gift aid, which was another tax benefit. And benefiting from the tax breaks means that all the income that you have essentially can be used on your charitable purpose. And that's a key reason as well why people give to charities, because it maximizes the income that can be spent, is because 20% is not going on tax to the government. So that's a big benefit. You're also much more likely to be able to receive funds through fundraising and donations. So much more likely to receive grants. The public as well generally are more comfortable giving to charities because they understand there's some kind of regulation around these organizations. You can't take profits out of the organization. I think that's hopefully obvious by now if you're a charity. Again, there's this idea around your purpose. Your sole purpose can't be political if you're a charity. So charities are meant to be completely independent from party politics, from political candidates. So you can't be like making donations to parties or candidates. You can't have your sole purpose to be campaigning on changes to the law, even though that might be part of the work that you want to do, which is totally fine if you're a charity. It can't be the sole thing that you do. Charities in the UK, they're regulated by the Charity Commission. So that's a regulatory body which has quite a lot of powers in the sector. So it's one thing to bear in mind is that if you do want to set up a charity, that there is this additional level of regulation. There is this regulator that can intervene in your activities if it thinks that you're not doing your charitable purpose as you said you were going to do it. If they think there's something going wrong in the organization in terms of how it's being run or governed, they do have powers to like step in and intervene and ask questions and demand documents. So it's not something that happens very often, but it can happen. So it's just to be aware that compared to the community interest company, which is regulated, but not to the same extent, the Charity Commission is much more heavy-handed. And you also see that in terms of when you're applying to be a charity, the application process is much longer. That asks a lot more questions. You have to give a lot more evidence on like what the work that you're trying to do and how it supports the public benefit. And once you become a charity, it's really hard to undo that. You can't really reverse out of being a charity once you've set it up. So also that's to bear in mind, like once you've started, it's hard to stop. And how do you become a charity? So there's two ways you can become a charity. And I said, if you come into the breakout rooms, we'll talk through one of these in more detail. But one option is that a lot of people do is they set up a company limited by guarantee first, which is quite a quick process. And then they apply for registration with the Charity Commission. And that charitable registration kind of becomes like a wrapper around the company limited by guarantee. And that process can take quite a long time, somewhere between 4 to 8 months to get your charity registration. The other option is that you set up a charitable incorporated organization, and that is just directly with the Charity Commission. And that's the example that I'll go through in the breakout room in a moment. And it can take, again, still quite a long time. It's a very similar process to the other option. But you're only registered with one regulator as opposed to two. So it's a bit more straightforward to go for this charitable incorporated organization. And you also don't need to have any money in the bank. If you're a company limited by guarantee setting up as a charity, you need to have £5,000 of income before you set up, but you don't need it with a charitable incorporated organization. And then this was, okay, how are we doing for time? I'm just thinking.
I think we have 5 minutes for the case study and then we can take a break.
Did you want to do the case study, Kaya?
Sure. Okay. So this is just a quick one to think through some of the issues with charities, charitable incorporated organizations. So the scenario is you're passionate about the transformative power that education and access to opportunities have on young people's lives. You want to provide a platform for this, and you plan to do it by running youth leadership, mentoring programs, classes for essential skills like sewing, baking, and hair braiding. You've met two mentors who are really supportive of your work. They want to help you grow your idea. One of them thinks they can help you get some of your programs funded through grants. So the question is, what legal structure could you set up and why would you choose that legal structure? Would anybody like to come in? I would love somebody else to answer other than myself.
I would say CIO because it's quick. It's quicker than the other form, and you don't really need any money in the bank, as Samara has said already. And if you've already got the mentees or mentors, good to go.
Absolutely, bang on. So CIO, yes, you have two mentors. Maybe they'll be trustees. Maybe they're willing to come on board as trustees. So you might have 2 of your 3 trustees sorted already. One of them thinks they can help you get grants. And so you're obviously looking for grant funding. CIOs are an easier legal form for you to be able to attract grant funding because you're a charity. You can also go out to the wider community for grant funding. You will benefit from tax exemption, so you don't have to pay tax on any of the grants or any of the business that you run through this. So you can run your skills workshops. You can have people pay money to attend those workshops, and then you're not paying tax on that money. What about yourself? How would you position yourself within this organization if you want to get paid?
CEO?
Yeah, totally. CEO. So you don't want to be a trustee because you can't pay yourself. So you want to be an employee, and you probably need to go out and find your 3rd trustee to be able to register the organization. So this is actually a real case study again from a Turn Ideas into Action alumni. So this is Active Horizons. They chose to be a CIO. And the implications of that, as we've talked about, is they'll need to have a board of trustees. Staff can be paid. So I'm assuming that the person who set this up is the CEO or an equivalent person. Lucas can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my assumption. I know they're not a trustee because I looked that up. They get tax exemptions and it's a lot easier for them to get grant funding. So those are the case studies. We're going to take a quick break now and give all of you a breather for about 10 minutes. I can see there's some questions in the chat, so we might answer that while you're away, and we'll come back at 1:15 and see you then.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen again. Thank you for that lovely musical interlude, Lucas. Okay, so we finished with the break. Hopefully everyone's back. Maybe some people could send some thumbs up so I know that you're back in the room. Anyone? Oh no, maybe you can't send thumbs up on Zoom. My bad. Oh no, you can. Any? Okay, I can't see if anyone is. Megan's left.
We have 3 thumbs up so far.
Well, we'll just keep going. Okay, so the next part of this workshop is a deep dive into setting up a community interest company or a charity. So we're going to focus on the CIO if it's a charity, and Kaya is going to take community interest companies and I'll take charity. So hopefully you Lucas emailed around earlier today a worksheet which kind of sets out the step-by-step process, and we're just going to walk through that together. If you're in the CIC session, kind of look in more depth into actually how you complete that CIC form, some of the wording you might use, and then in the charity one we'll look at the governing document and parts of the application that you might need to that kind of the trickier parts of the charity application. Great, so that was the breakout rooms. Hope everyone found it helpful. We've got just 10 minutes left now, just to cover one more aspect, which I think a few people have asked us about, which was whether or not you can change your legal structure. If so, for example, if you've set up a company limited by guarantee and you want to become a charity or a CIC, or if you've set up a CIC and you want to become a charity, is it possible to essentially, oh, hang on, I need to make this a bit bigger. Jump through the different legal structures. Sorry, Kaya, do you want to do this slide? I feel like this was actually your slide and I've just jumped in. There we go.
No, that's fine. So I think what we'll do is, just at a really high level, talk to you about changing legal structures. In my breakout room, we had a specific question about somebody's registered already as a company limited by guarantee. Can I change to a KIC now? And the answer is yes, as you can see on the screen. So you can go from being a company limited by guarantee, a CLG, to a KIC CLG. I'm just dropping in the chat the process for how you do that. So it's a form that you fill out and you have to pass a couple of resolutions, but the government website is fairly clear about doing that. If you have any questions about that conversion specifically, Lucas might be able to help you, but if not, feel free to come to us and we're happy to help you with that. Similarly, if you're a company limited by shares, you can convert to being a community interest company that is limited by shares. But what you can't do, as you'll see on the opposite side of the screen, is if you're limited by shares, you can't switch that structure to being limited by guarantee. Or if you're limited by guarantee, you can't switch that structure to be limited by shares. So you have to start a whole new application process if you want to do that. So you can't just swap around. You can convert from being a community interest company to being a charity. I think we talked about this earlier in the session. One person is intending to do that. And there is a process to go through with that as well, which I had dropped a link to earlier in the chat, but I'll try and find that link and repost that. So if you want to go from being a KIC to a charity to access grant funding more easily, for example, yes, that's possible. What you can't do easily is reverse out of being a charity. So if you started out as a charity and then you realize, regulation is a total pain, or this structure really isn't working for me, or I don't have 3 trustees that I can maintain easily, it's really difficult then you can't go backwards from being a charity. You basically have to shut down and start again. So that is the disadvantage. If there's anything on here where people already have a legal structure that they've set up and they're not sure based on this slide whether they can change or not, feel free to say. And I think what we'll do is use the last 10 minutes, and we're happy to stay on because I think we have the session until 8:15. We'll try and finish in 10 minutes, but I know there were quite a few questions that we didn't get to in my KIC breakout room. So we're happy to answer those now for everybody. We're happy to stay on for anybody who has additional questions. So we will, I think, end the official part of the presentation there. And now over to you guys.